morning. I just finished my morning meditation. I wanted to share some of the ideas and insights on the practical, real-world application of meditative practice and the real-world practical application of spirituality, because we often talk about staying present and we talk about infinite universal consciousness and dropping the ego and dropping the narrative. We often talk about these things. But how do we apply this in the real world, in our day-to-day lives? Because we often see these videos of the sages and the saints and the monks in the Zen monasteries and things. And I think many people, me included, especially when I began the spiritual journey, I looked at these individuals and I thought, wow, I'd love to have that level of inner peace. But on some level I'm thinking, but it's all right for them, isn't it? They live in monasteries, or they live in temples, or in huts in the woods, or up on mountains and things, or in ashrams. And there's always that element of, well, there's doubt that maybe this thing about presence and dropping the ego, maybe that works if you're in that situation. But how do we apply it when we live in the real world? In the real world, really in the fake illusory matrix, the Maya illusory world, but you know what I mean. So I thought I would share an experience that I'm currently having, a situation that I'm currently having that maybe you can relate to, because we often have these situations and circumstances arise that threaten to overwhelm our inner peace. And essentially, it doesn't matter what the situation or circumstance is. I think it doesn't really matter whether you're in a temple or up a mountain or in a hut in the woods, or if you're stood in line in Tesco and the person in front of you is taking too long to scan their items on the self-service checkout. It doesn't matter. Or if you're stuck in traffic, or if your kids are doing your head in. The promise of spirituality, the promise of awakening, the promise of enlightenment is that you remain at peace regardless of the situation or the circumstances. And I wanted to share that this is true in my experience, not just as to read in a book and go, oh, that presence thing, that awakening thing sounds lovely, but actually as a real felt experience. To my mind, the meditative practice that we do, the spirituality that we do, or maybe you're religious, the religious practice that you follow, the religious beliefs that you follow, has to help us in the real world. It has to help us when we are in stressful circumstances. It has to help us when things aren't going well. If your spirituality and meditative practice doesn't help you in those situations, then I would advise you deepen your search or widen your search. Because if it's not going to help you in practical terms, we're trying to find inner peace, trying to find that sense of serenity, that sense of unity, wholeness, health, mental health, physical health, the unity of being, wholeness. That's where the word health comes from the word whole. And so if we have these meditative practices and principles that we learn about and read about and try to practice, but it doesn't help us in our everyday life, then you're wasting your time, basically. You're putting the work in, you should be getting something out of that. So the situation I currently find myself in is a parking ticket fiasco. And maybe you can relate. Maybe you can relate to this. If not this particular scenario, there will be very similar ones that you'll have encountered. The unexpected bill that comes through, the car that breaks down, the situation that suddenly arises that you weren't expecting. It catches you on the blind side. These are situations and circumstances that threaten to overwhelm you and can disrupt your inner peace. They can disrupt your life. These are the incidents that happen that throw you off mentally. So this parking ticket fiasco, I won't go into too many specific details, but just to give a brief overview, I had a letter from a bailiff saying I owe money from an unpaid parking ticket. First I've heard about it. And this is the first I've heard about it. So the council have been sending letters about this parking ticket to my old address. They didn't have my new address. They've been sending it to my old address. So this situation has escalated, unbeknownst to me, running in the background, and I've been unaware of it. And the first I'm hearing about it now is this letter, very threatening sounding letter coming from a bailiff. And I think back and I go, hang on, I had a parking ticket that I paid. Maybe it's just a mistake with that. Anyway, so that's the situation. It's the threatening letter that comes through. Maybe you've had this. Maybe you've had an unpaid bill. You get this bill and you're like, hang on a minute, where's this bill come from? Like, and it's something that you just missed. It's just, just an admin error you missed. These things happen to everyone quite commonly. So I'd already paid this ticket. It turns out there was another ticket on the car that has been lost somewhere, so I don't really understand what's happened there. But anyway, this whole fiasco's been going on. Now, how's this relevant to meditative practice? So for me, I didn't have to, but I got into meditative practice because I needed something that was going to help me with my anxiety. I was really suffering. I had it very severely, very severely. Nobody would think it now these days. About, hey, you're such a chill guy, such a calm guy. I never used to be. I used to have the sort of anxiety where I couldn't make phone calls. I just couldn't. Panic attacks. Could hardly leave the house. That's how bad my anxiety used to be. And my depression. It was so bad at times. I couldn't get out of bed. So when I started doing all of these practices and learning these things to overcome this, I had to find things that were going to work. I couldn't just mess around anymore. I couldn't be messing about with things. I had to find something that works. Because in the past, just 5 years ago, something like that letter coming through would have me in a right panic, a flap. I'd be sweating, panicking, heart beating, everything. I'm sure many people can relate to that surge of panic that comes up. And there's a lot of people that can't relate to that. That would say, oh, well, they get a letter through like that and they go, well, whatever, like, don't worry about it, just ring them up or whatever, like, just don't worry about it. They wouldn't be able to understand why it's a big deal. Previously, it would have triggered something in me. Now, how does meditation then help us? So, from everything I've learned and all of the practices that I've done have kicked in automatically in this situation. So I just wanted to share that these things do work in a very practical, real way. So the time that I put in to set my alarm clock a bit earlier and make sure I'm doing my 20 minutes of meditation a day, to make sure I'm looking after my physical and mental health, to really get to grips with these principles of let's stay present and drop the narrative and heal the inner child and do this inner work. Do this deep, deep work, the shadow work, the difficult, tough work. Doing all of that, it wasn't a waste of time. Because now, when these things happen, these situations and circumstances happen, Yes, it's annoying. Yes, it's inconvenient, but that's all it is. It's annoying and inconvenient. I wanted to share the difference. Previously, I'd have been sweating, heart racing, panicking, and I'd have been in emotional chaos, psychological turmoil, probably for weeks whilst this is being settled. Whereas now, it's reading the letter, and I can't lie, yes, that old feeling started to rise up, the panic. What am I going to do? Threatening letter from a bailiff. Panic. The guilt. And then the rage. How dare they? Wow, what a... And not really knowing how to feel about things. Something was being triggered. That's what was happening. But then I recognised it. So here's the key. In that presence, bringing it fully into the present, you automatically just take a deep breath and you start to focus on the situation as it is in the moment. Not the narrative, not the story that's building up, not the worst case scenario that your mind goes to, because that's what anxiety does. It goes straight to worst case scenario and rises up all kinds of images of bailiffs coming to your door and taking your TV and stuff. Being arrested, taken to jail. It sounds funny now, but that's where your mind goes. That's what anxiety does. It rises the worst case scenario up. Like, what am I going to do? Feeling that rise up, the presence kicks in. Present moment. Ah, okay. It's just a letter. Now, with Advaita, the non-duality, we drop away all narratives and stories. It's not two. It's all one unified whole. And nothing's really happening. Everything is just an appearance within consciousness. And that feels like quite a high concept idea. That's like a philosophical concept idea. How's it going to help us in the real world? Well, because everything's just an appearance within consciousness, this thing that is happening has no emotional charge. The narrative has my emotions rising up because there's a story. So the narrative is triggering strong emotions. But because I'm in the Advaita, I'm not identified as the egoic, separate self, the false self, the temporary, finite narrative. Because I'm not identified with that, there's no emotional charge. No powerful anxiety response, no adrenal response, no stress, catecholamine response. It doesn't rise up. It came up a little and then was gone straight away because there's no narrative. And when there's no narrative, it's just a letter. And when there's just a letter and there's just a phone call. And yes, so this situation is a bit of a debacle now. I love that word, debacle. It's a debacle. It's a fiasco. Because I've had to ring the bailiff company, find out what's gone on. Then I had to ring the council. And then I had to ring the bailiff company again. And then email the council. And then the council told me I needed to do these 2 forms and send them to a different authority. And then wait for the authority to get back to me. You know, when it goes like this, it's not simple. It just goes on and on. And if I hadn't practiced all of this meditation and learned all of these principles and done all of this work, I'd be in a lot of turmoil right now, psychologically. What am I going to do? And the narrative says, why does this always happen to me? And why curse you, capitalist society? How do you... And I just have bad luck, or I'm cursed. Why does this happen to me? Or why are they picking on me? What paranoia? What are they... That's the narrative. The reality is that there's a few phone calls and some emails. That's it. That's it. So just think of the suffering that has been avoided. Now, I can't think of anything more practical than that. So the practical people, the very hard-nosed people, and, you know, Mr. Scientist Man and Miss Scientist Lady, they are going, no, this meditation thing's not practical, and this spirituality that you talk about, Advaita, no, what we need to do is be very practical. Well, what's more practical than being able to live a very efficient, functional, reasonable, rational, calm, and considered life? Isn't that the most practical thing? Am I, like, have I really gone doolally by dropping away the ego, the false, temporary, finite, separate self? Have I lost it? Have I gone and ran off skipping into the woods and taken all kinds of substances and covering myself in tattoos and dreadlocks and stuff and just gone bananas? That sounded very judgmental, I've just realised. There's nothing wrong with doing any of those things. It's just I'm trying to highlight that's a common concern people have if if I get too deep into the meditation thing, am I just going to go and drop out? No, you drop in. You drop in. You drop into your life. I'm finally free to live that normal life that everybody else was living. For all those years that I couldn't access a normal life because I had anxiety and depression. I couldn't access the real world. And I was very jealous of the people that could get a letter and go, oh, that's annoying, and make the calls they needed, and they just forget about it. 20 minutes later, it's done for them. I used to be very envious of that because I wasn't capable of doing that, and I would be in a real panic about it. The old me might have just panicked and just gone, oh God, and rang up the bailiff and just paid the bill. But now, practically speaking, rationally and logically, I was like, I don't owe this. I might owe the original parking ticket. That's probably where this is probably gonna end. It's still not over, by the way. It's ongoing. By the time this video's up, it will be resolved. And please, whenever I post a video like this, people don't focus on the practicality of it. I'm not looking for legal advice on how to circumnavigate the admin system, the bureaucracy. That's not what the video is about. That's all being dealt with. What I'm interested in is what happened in terms of the practical response of Zen, the practical response of Advaita. It kicks in when you need it the most. This is why it's worth doing. You might not feel like it's doing anything. You might feel like you've been doing your meditative practice and you think, well, this feels like a waste of time because I don't feel anything happening. But you're building up layers and layers of strength. It's like if you go and hit the gym often, you're not really seeing any progress, you don't really feel any progress until you need it in the real world. Somebody trips and falls and you catch them. And you go, oh wow, something just kicked in, I just grabbed them and I was strong enough to hold them and pick them back up. And you're like, wow, okay. Or suddenly you can carry all your shopping in from the car in one go. You're like, whoa, I'm a lot stronger than I used to be. But you only know that when something happens that requires that strength. So often the situation and circumstance arises, and now your own inner peace is demonstrated because you're not sunk, you're not dragged into the emotional turmoil, you're not dragged into the emotional mess. Because the narrative didn't kick in, the meditation kicked in, presence kicked in, consciousness kicked in, awareness kicked in, not the narrative. Not the ego, because the ego is fragile. The story is fragile. It contains that poor inner child who's always terrified. That's what the story contains. But when you're in that full embodied presence, that full embodied awakening, the inner child is still playing. The inner child's playing in the playground. He's not concerned about any of this. The inner child shouldn't be concerned about any of this. The inner child can just go play. I'm the adult, I'll take care of this, and it's not a big deal. You don't have to worry, kid, don't worry. I won't go too much into the inner child stuff, that'll be a later video, but that's what's happening essentially when you get that trigger energy come up. But as to the practical, because people worry about, if I get into the meditation, won't I not be able to function? How fascinating, what a paradox. That it's actually the opposite is true. There are so many paradoxes on this path, because it's the opposite that's true. You'd think if I get too present and if I drop my ego, I won't be able to function. The opposite is true. These days, the less egoic I am, the more that I don't procrastinate. When my ego's not there and I've got something to do, let's say another practical example, I need to book a MOT, car MOT, or I need to book a dentist appointment. When I'm feeling a bit egoic and I'm all stuck in my little narrative, I put that off for a long time, put it off for weeks, maybe months. But when I'm like just present, it's like, oh, that needs to be done. You pick up the phone, you get it done. It's not a big deal. It's just done. It's over. So whatever your situation or circumstance is, it will be made a lot easier, certainly a lot calmer, by not only the meditative practice that you do when you have the time to do it. I would recommend in the morning a good 10 to 20 minutes. But also remembering to go into the present, remembering to go into your... This is why it's so important to go deep in meditation and really abide there and really embody is a good word, integrate. Because we have to have a real experience of it in order for it to get deep enough to take. Get deep enough, deep, right into the core of your being. It has to get deep enough that when these situations happen, it's there. It's right in your DNA. It's right in your bones. It's the ultimate fallback position of total serenity, total peace. That's why it's important to do this meditation and not feel like, oh, it's not doing anything. It's doing a lot in ways you might not even be aware. Just your whole life is a lot calmer. And if you're calmer and not so egoic, everything just gets better. People seem friendlier, you make friends better, you just are calmer at work. Just think of all of these situations that happen usually during the day. And if you're in an egoic state, you're going to trigger that stress response all the time. So yes, there's all of this talk of presence and like dropping away the ego and stuff, because people can misunderstand, and especially in like Advaita and Neo-Advaita and things, it can be a bit, people misunderstand because some of the terminology says nothing exists, or in the meditation you might be saying there's nobody here, there's nothing to do, there's nothing to fix, there's nothing to change. And so when you get a letter like that through, or something happens in your everyday life that requires some action, that requires some fixing, that requires some changing, you think, but how in that moment, how do I then go into there's nobody here and there's nothing to do? Because I can't just ignore this letter. There's clearly a letter. So how then? How can I say everything is just an appearance in consciousness when I have a real practical thing to take care of? Well, I suppose the deepest level there is that there is something to take care of, but it's going to be taken care of. It's just an appearance. It's just another aspect of the story. But there's no real difference to ringing up the bailiff company than there is to making a cup of tea. There's no real difference. It's all the same appearance. The screen of consciousness can play a horror movie or it can play an action movie, or it can play a comedy, or it can play a drama. There's an infinite number of things that can play on the screen. But the screen itself isn't really interested. The screen itself remains the screen. So that's the fallback position. When you get the threatening letter, you get the nasty letter. When the nasty thing happens in the real world, when you get that unexpected bill, when you're accused of something, it's a horrible feeling. It triggers that guilt. Did I do something wrong? What am I being accused? Persecution. Well, that's like a horror movie playing on the screen. Horrible. But you remember you're the screen. You're not the movie. So that was just my thoughts and my insights on the practical application of meditation and presence and Advaita when it comes to real world scenarios. And I would urge and recommend, everyone's path is fantastic. I believe in the integral approach, which is there's no right or wrong path. Everyone's an individual. We're all travelling up the mountain, and we've all got a different path towards the top of the mountain, okay? And all paths are fine. But I would say, if your meditative practice, if your spirituality, the spirituality that you're learning about and practicing, doesn't kick in or doesn't help you when a stressful and difficult scenario arises, I'd say you're missing out. You're missing out on a big, big benefit of spirituality. You're missing a big, big pot of gold that you could quite easily get. If you've been putting the work into something, it's worth also looking into the practices that are going to bring you a stable, embodied, integrated sense of inner peace. And whatever path you're on is great. It's fantastic. If it's religious or it's spiritual or whatever it is, even if it's just completely informal and you've just had an experience, I would invite you to look deeper into the practices that create lasting inner peace as well. Because sometimes I think as well people get a bit misled and get led down a path that, while is useful and interesting and might bring you closer to truth, eventually it just leads to more turmoil. I think that's fair to say. So does it bring you peace? Does it bring you joy? If not, look deeper, look again. And if you've never done any meditative practice because you think it's all a load of bunk and a load of hooey, I would look into it, because wouldn't it be nice to not be so stressed? Wouldn't it be nice to not be so anxious? Wouldn't it be nice to not worry so much or feel negative emotions so much? And you don't need to go into too deep. You don't need any beliefs or anything like that. You don't need anything like that. You don't. All it takes is a little focus and some time out. That's it. That's everything I have for you this morning. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you would like some more health and well-being content on your feed. And just thanks for listening. I really appreciate all the listeners, all the subscribers. Thank you. Take care, be well, and stay present.